Good morning. This is Breakfast with Dan Walker and Sally Nugent.
It's just gone 7:30. The Prime Minister will ask US President Joe Biden to delay withdrawing troops from Afghanistan so more people can be evacuated.
Many thousands of people are still crowded outside Kabul airport, desperate to leave after the Taliban takeover.
Let's speak, as promised, to the Minister for the Armed Forces, James Heappey, who joins us live on BBC Breakfast this morning. Thank you for being with us. Be really great to get as much information out of you today as possible. We're hearing a lot of reports from Afghanistan. We're seeing a lot of what's going on at Kabul airport. Can you bring us right up to date? What has happened overnight? Where are we this morning?
Good morning. So 1,821 people have been evacuated from Kabul over the last 24 hours, over 8 flights operated by the Royal Air Force. The flow into the EHC at the Baron Hotel remains good. There are 9 flights planned for the next 24 hours.
OK, we're hearing reports from German media that there was possibly a firefight at Kabul airport overnight. Do you know about that? What can you tell us about that?
We're aware of that. It was on the other side of the airfield. It didn't involve any UK troops or UK nationals.
How hopeful are you, Mr. Heappey, that deadline of August the 31st will be extended? We know that there's the meeting of the G7 will take place tomorrow. What sort of situation are the UK in terms of that discussion with the Americans?
Well, the reality is that we've made great progress over the last week. 6,631 people have come out in the last week. And actually, if we were to look at the numbers of people we were trying to evacuate last Saturday, that would effectively have been mission accomplished. But the reality is that over the last week, more people have come forward who have an entitlement under ARAP. And then in addition to that, the government has quite rightly sought to broaden the scheme to include people from Afghan civil society who we think are vulnerable and who we would like to bring out this week if we possibly could. So that means that the sort of context of the discussion with the United States has changed. I suspect that they've made all the same realizations over the last week as we have. And so there's a discussion tomorrow for G7 leaders about whether or not we can extend. But let's be clear, although they might be the 7 most powerful people on the planet meeting to discuss what they want to do, they don't get to make the decision of themselves. The Taliban get a vote as well. And that's why in this building, we're continuing to work towards a deadline of the 31st of August. And we're trying to make sure that every minute counts in bringing out as many people as possible before that time.
Logistically, I mean, there's a lot of talk about this in the papers this morning. Let's say that deadline remains August the 31st. There is talk that if that is the case, then the last flight out for reasons of logistics and planning and preparation and processing would be or could be as early as Wednesday of this week. Is that true?
So I'm not going to be able to share the detail of when the last evacuation flight will happen, and that's for humanitarian reasons. What we do not want to see is people desperate to make the last flight in crowds like we saw on Saturday, causing crushes that sadly caused 7 people to die outside of the Baron Hotel. And then for security reasons, in terms of the military operation on the ground, we're also not able really to share the dates of the last military flights out because there is an acute threat from Islamic State, particularly in Kabul. So I know that your viewers will be keen to have mapped out for them all of the days that we're working to, but this is a very live military operation with real humanitarian risks. People have died trying to get out of the country in the crush, and with real security risks because our troops on the ground face a very, very real threat. But at the moment, we are working within an envelope that finishes on the 31st of August.
OK. I appreciate you can't go into sort of extreme detail. I understand that it's a very sensitive operation. But can you tell us, again, because there are suggestions that there might be somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 people still in Afghanistan that you're trying to get back to the UK. Is that a number that you recognise?
Well, the numbers that I recognise are that there's around 1,800 UK eligible people remaining in country. There's about 2,275 ARAP. And then there's this list of people that have been created over the course of the last week from wider Afghan civil society who we would like to get out if we're able. Now, that list is growing all the time. And in some cases, it's being reduced all the time because we find out that people have been duplicated and put onto the list through 2 separate routes. So I don't want to put a number on it because it's very fluid. But what we're focused on are the people that were originally part of op pitting, which is UK eligible people and the ARAP scheme. And we'll get out as many of everybody else as we can. But as the Secretary of State and I have said on a number of occasions, and I'm afraid there is simply no shying away from, we will not be able to get everybody out through the air bridge. And that's why the second phase of this operation is just as important as the first. There is a route to reach the UK through hubs in the region and potentially from our embassies and high commissions, and people can get to the UK facilitated by the UK from there, rather than having to put themselves in the hands of people smugglers.
And just to be clear, ARAP is Afghan Relations and Assistance Policy. That's you keep using that, just for clarity for our viewers.
Forgive me, the MOD loves an acronym. You're absolutely right that is what we're talking about. They are the people who have worked directly with the UK government over the last 20 years, be that the military operation or the sort of wider diplomatic and aid effort. They are the people that we have always said we have a debt to. We're getting through them very quickly indeed, but we're also allowing people to come into the scheme if they're eligible. And I make no apology for effectively widening the goalposts over the course of the last week by seeking to be more generous. Our admirals, generals and air marshals that are running this mission have been presented with no end of challenge by us moving the goalposts like that, but they have risen to that challenge admirably. So too have all of the men and women of the Royal Air Force, Army, Navy who are delivering the mission. We will get everybody out that we possibly can.
Just to reassert that again, Afghan Relocations and Assistance Policy. I know that you're trying to get through it and speedily, and you're used to these acronyms, but that's when we hear you say ARAP, that's what you mean.
That's exactly right.
I'm interested as well in, you talk about these 2 phases of this operation, and obviously at the moment what is happening, particularly at Kabul airport, relies on the Taliban almost assisting the US and UK troops. And it's very strange to see Taliban fighters and UK troops sort of working quite closely, sometimes within just a few feet of each other. We spoke to the former ambassador to Afghanistan, Sir Nicholas Kay, on this programme about an hour ago. And he said he doesn't buy that these are new Taliban regime and things will be different. He says he still doesn't trust them. Do you trust the Taliban?
Well, look, there's sort of 2 answers to that question. Do I think that they are right now an effective partner in providing the outer cordon security to the international evacuation effort? The evidence on the ground is that broadly they are, although we are aware of all of the reports of beatings and worse around the city. But fundamentally, the reason that we have been able to go from 300 or 400 people in the middle of last week to 1,000 people on Friday and Saturday to 1,700 or 1,800 people over the last 48 hours is because the Taliban have given us the space by moving their security cordon further away, and because they are now marshalling the crowds more effectively by putting the US and the UK people into separate queues. That is something that without which the mission would not be going at the pace that it is going. Now, the other part of your question is whether or not...
Yeah, how long you would trust them for? Because obviously, we are relying on them at the moment to assist this operation.
Well, we're taking nothing for granted, and that is why the brigadiers that are forward commanding the military mission are in this surreal experience of having spent most of their careers thus far fighting the Taliban, and now they're having to have daily conversations with them. Of course, there's a wider question about how reliable the Taliban are as an international partner, as the government of Afghanistan in the future. And everybody in the UK government has their eyes wide open to the possibility that the Taliban may have changed, that they may not want to be an international pariah, but they will need to show that that is the case through their actions, not just through what they say in their communications with journalists around the world.
Can I ask you for the moment, just a couple of questions really on, can you take your ministerial hat off and speak as a former member of the armed forces? What is it like, do you think, for some of those troops who are making what could potentially be life and death decisions, allowing people on flights? Having to make that in such a situation where there is panic in some of those large crowds, and they are having to make those decisions for individuals, for families, for groups. What sort of things are they going through?
So, look, in my own military service, I had a couple of occasions where parents brought to my patrol or to the base that I was in their horrendously injured child and were desperate for our help. There's a sort of thing that as a soldier you train to apply lethal force. That's what you train to do. And bizarrely, even though that feels more dangerous, you're more comfortable doing that than when you're faced with those sorts of humanitarian challenges. Nothing that I experienced in my time in the army is anything like what the young paratroopers and soldiers from the Yorkshire Regiment are faced with on that cordon outside the Baron Hotel, particularly on Saturday, when they were seeing people die in the crush immediately in front of them. And they can't just take off their helmets and their body armor and put aside their rifles and focused on the humanitarian challenge, because there is Islamic State in the Khorasan province active within Kabul. We know they want to try and get a hit against Western forces. And that means that our troops have got to have one finger on their trigger, whilst in the other hand, they're holding people's babies. I can't imagine what level of emotional intelligence that requires from young 18 and 19-year-old men and women who are serving in our armed forces. I just know that they're doing our nation proud in the most extraordinary circumstances.
I had the privilege a few years ago of spending some time in Camp Bastion in Afghanistan back in 2013, and I'm still struck now by the level of care and concern that those soldiers had for those on their right and on their left. I wonder as well, as someone who's been in that situation, how do you square that idea that you leave nobody behind with the frustrations of a position you find yourself in now in government, being tangled up in that policy, which means that is going to happen?
Well, there's just a hard reality to those things. And in some ways, actually, you're right. There's the soldier's code of you never leave a man behind, and that weighs heavily. But also, having been in the military and having served on military operations, I am acutely aware of the military realities. And it is not possible for us to do what's being done at Kabul International Airport without the Americans, not just because of the number of people that they've got forward providing force protection, but because the US Air Force has effectively taken over the full operation of the airfield. That's why this needs to be an international decision to extend. And if there is no opportunity to extend, either because there's not the international appetite to do so, or perhaps more likely the Taliban are unwilling to allow us to, then we need to continue with our plan to be out by the 31st. And if that is to be the case, every minute counts to get as many people out as we can in the meantime.
James Heapy, really appreciate your time this morning. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you very much.